All right. Typically,
everybody's
when
dark.
Ray does an event and people have a podcast or an interview with Ray, it turns into about half an hour of who is this extraordinary guy? Because Ray has an extraordinary, interesting history as a person. So I'm going to get that out of the way to start with, and then we're going to go into the really important things today, which is the ideas. So just so you know who you're hearing from, and so you can contextualize what he's telling you, let me give you a little bit of Ray's background. So he's a New York boy, like many of us here. Grew up in Queens, went to public school, PS 188, and then Martin Van Buren High School. He decided at 5 years old to become an inventor. He began,
Six.
what? Six, okay. 6 years, oh, so much longer, 20% longer. He began building robots at 8. He wrote his first paper on the theory of the neocortex at 14, his first computer program at 15, and then by 17, he was on a television show, which some of the seniors here may recall, called I've Got a Secret. And the secret that this 17-year-old kid had was that he had developed, built, and programmed a computer to compose music, which was played on the show. That invention of his ultimately won the national science competition. He won the Westinghouse Talent Search, was invited to the White House, where he was congratulated by Lyndon Johnson. And then when he went off to college, he started his first company as an entrepreneur at 20, about how to select colleges for high school students. He sold that ultimately for what today would be worth about $1 million retrospectively. And then he went on over the course of a career as an inventor, as an entrepreneur, as a futurist to do a whole host of things, including he was instrumental in helping to invent the first omnifont optical character recognition, the CCD flatbed scanner, the first text-to-speech synthesizer, the first reading machine for the blind. In the 1980s, working with Stevie Wonder, he invented the first synthesizer that actually sounded like a real musical instrument, which became the standard on stage for most of the major rock groups in the world, that ultimately won him a Grammy. How many of you have Grammys for doing this? Since then, he's done innovations and inventions in speech recognition, electronic learning, medical education, investment software, more and more and more. When I tell you that there are actually 5 films, feature films about him, from The Transcendent Man to The Singularity Is Nearer, to Plug and Pray and others, you can get an idea of what this extraordinary guy is all about. But the reason we're here tonight is because starting at a very young age, Ray made a number of observations about technology and what had happened, what was happening, and where it was going. And he began writing books. And his first book was written in 1989, published in 1990, and it was called The Age of Intelligent Machines. And in this book, he noted back in 1989 that computers were getting powerful enough that they could begin to mimic the human mind, and that we would eventually have something called artificial general intelligence, a computer that could be as smart as a person. This was, for anybody who had not heard, remember, there was before the internet, people hadn't heard of computers or whatever it is, and so it went like a rock. Nobody read the book. It was read only internally in circles, in the AI circles, where it actually won the best science book of 1990, but for the general public, they had no clue. Okay, so 10 years later, 1999, he writes a second book called The Age of Spiritual Machines. And now he doubles down on his predictions, and he says not only are computers going to be able to develop minds like people, but it will be everything like a person, including consciousness, spirituality. And by the way, this is going to be happening by 30 years from now, by 2029. Very close to here. So this one, all of a sudden, was people saying, okay, that's really weird. This is like science fiction. And this became a category bestseller in science books. But it still didn't hit the general population. It took another 6 years for his third big book in this area to come out. And that was a book called The Singularity Is Nearer. And in it, he doubled down on his predictions, kept to the same timeline as what was happening with AI, noted that everything else was going to go along with it, and that we were going to have an outcome in the foreseeable future that would boggle the mind. This book was the bombshell. This blew up, it became an international bestseller, and you basically had three sets of people who responded to this. The first third of the population says, well, that's crazy. Human exceptionalism, people are people, computers can't do any of this stuff. Wow, go away, ridiculous. The second set said, okay, your historical analysis is accurate, but don't worry about it because we're not going to get there. They're the pessimists. We're going to warm the planet out of existence. We're going to destroy ourselves with a suitcase nuke or whatever. But the third group said, okay, you're right. What are we going to do about it? And out of that group, Ray created something called Singularity University, along with Peter Diamandis, who had founded the X Prize Foundation. I got involved at that point with Ray, and Singularity University brought together a bunch of people to try and say, hey, the future's coming, let's try and plan, knowing that it's coming, and see what we could do with this. And the reason that this is all so important is because the things that Ray has been projecting are literally mind-boggling. It's not just science fiction, like things you see in Star Trek or whatever, or Star Wars. It is truly mind-bending, mind-boggling things. And it all comes down to one word, and that word is exponential. And so Ray, with that background, having gotten the hagiography out of the way, right, what was it that caused you to first think about the rate of change of technology?
Well, that's pretty good recollection. I'll have to get to you before I present my background. I've been involved with exponential growth for a long time. And if we could actually show the graph, because this is the history of computers. It's on an exponential graph. So this started in 1939 with a computer that did 0.00007 calculations per second per constant dollar. And up in the right-hand corner, 2024 is a NVIDIA computer that does 500 billion calculations per second per constant dollar. So it's a 75 quadrillion fold. Quadrillion means 1,000 trillion. 75,000 trillion fold increase for the amount of computer you get for the same price. And that's just the hardware. The actual rate of computation is equal to the hardware increase times the software increase. The software increase has also changed. Depends on what you're doing. Typically, it's like 1,000,000-fold. So this is comparable to 75 million, 1,000 trillion-fold increase for the same amount of money. And that's why we didn't have large language models in 1939.
So those are insane numbers, 75,000 quadrillion. I mean, we can't even comprehend that, right?
Yeah, but that's what actually happened.
And I know that's what happened, but but we still can't comprehend it. I mean, we are human beings are used to thinking linearly, right? You go forward.
We can see what it does. I mean, it creates large language models that are. I mean, the amount of increase that we've seen, hardware times software right now is about 10-fold per year. So we compare what large language models do today to what they did even 1 year ago. I can give you an example. So I asked Gemini 2.5, I said, write a funny poem using E.E. Cummings' poetry style. So that's all I said. I tried this a year ago, it didn't work. So this is what it wrote back. A squirrel named Nuts, with a twitch in his tail, very important looking, that twitch, discovered a peanut, not a peanut, mind you, but the peanut, round, fat, glorious, left just so by some two-legged giant, probably forgetful. He chirped, a small explosion of glee, or possibly gas, it's hard to tell with squirrels, and grabbed it with paws so quick they were almost invisible, like Monday morning motivation. Then horror, a blue jay, a feathered thief with eyes like polished disdain, swooped. Nuts, our hero with the aforementioned twitching tail, did not flinch. He juked, he jived, he became a flurry blur of anti-jay acrobatics. The peanut, alas, gravity, you cruel mistress, bounced once, twice into a drainpipe. Gurgle. Nuts stared, the blue jay smirked, or so it seemed, and flew off, probably to mock lesser rodents. Oh, the world so full of almosts and lost lunch. Nuts sighed, a tiny puff of squirrel breath, then twitched its tail, still important, and scampered off to find a slightly less epic acorn. Perhaps.
Okay, how many of you could do that? So
Now, it did take it 20 seconds to produce that. And I did it again, and it wrote something else that was very different, which I won't read you, but it's just as funny and different. And this was not possible a year ago. So that's the amount of progress we're making now in 1 year.
So that's an extraordinary development in 1 year. But the interesting thing is that it's tracking on this graph that you have. This is showing the computing power.
Well, this is the hardware. It's also times the software gains. We're actually making more software gains right now than hardware gains.
And so what is the effective doubling rate of this combined software and hardware?
Well, right now it's actually multiplying about 10 each year.
By 10 each year.
Yeah,
so if you think about that, 10 times every year, right? It's not going 1, 2, 3, 4. If you go linear, you go a straight line and you go up 1 step for every step you go out, after 30 steps out, you'll be 30 steps up. Well, if you go up...
I mean, most of the public thinks in linear terms. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, step 30, you're at 30. If you go 2, 4, 8, 16, which is exponential growth, at step 30, you're at 1 billion. And that's what we've actually seen. I mean, the computers I use...
And how long has this been happening?
Well, this is actually programmable computers going back to 1939.
1939 with computers.
Yeah.
And so one of the key theses of your original book, The Singularity Is Nearer, is that this growth, effective growth in technology, has been going back to the beginning of human history, right?
Yeah, it's true. And I mean, if we show the financial growth, I mean, this is the amount of money that the average person in the United States makes in constant dollars. And from 100 years ago to today, it's about 10-fold increase. So we're actually making 10-fold as much money each year per capita on an equal basis for the last 100 years.
Because we're being amplified, our work is being amplified by technology.
And we don't see it, you know, when we look at things 1 year at a time, but when you look at it for a large period of time, you can see it.
So the reason the original book, The Singularity Is Nearer, was such a bombshell was because it was like a 700-page exhaustive, provable analysis showing that this combination of hardware and then ultimately software had been doubling at this rate since the beginning of recorded history, right. And it was continuing going.
And it also made a prediction for 2029 that we would reach AGI.
So how do you define AGI, artificial general intelligence?
Well, there's some debate as to what it means, but basically one computer would be able to do everything that all human beings can do up to, let's say, postgraduate education in every field and combine things and do it much more quickly. I mean, even if someone could write this, they can't do it in 20 seconds.
So ultimately, AGI means having a computer that effectively is as smart, 100% smart, as anybody in any field, anywhere in the world, up to a postgraduate level.
And nobody can do that. I mean, Einstein knew certain things about physics, but and actually was interested in playing the violin, but he was no Jascha Heifetz. Jascha Heifetz actually liked physics, but he was no Einstein. So people have certain areas that they're expert at, but they're not expert at everything.
So when you have AGI, that AGI is expert at everything, and then because it's just a question of software running on hardware, you can duplicate that.
And it can also do things much more quickly. I mean, it can run a simulated experiment in, well, literally, Moderna actually looked at several 100 million different possibilities to create its vaccine. And they actually went through a simulation. They used different AI techniques, but they were able to eliminate everything except one, which they based their vaccine on, and they did that in 2 days. I mean, how long would it take? Generally, having human beings do it, it would take years or decades, and this took 2 days.
So essentially, AGI is artificial general intelligence having computers that are smarter than anybody, and because they're replicable, you could have 8 billion computers running AGI, smarter than everybody in the entire world. But that's just the computing power, right? Your book deals with everything else, from robotics to neuroscience to our understanding of
Robotics is
the
actually going to take a little longer, because it's, I mean, right now we haven't actually automated cleaning up a table. And I think we'll actually have that by 2029, but we won't have everything that computers can do, and that's going to take a little bit longer.
So people have looked at this progression of timeline and said, well, computers clearly didn't exist at the beginning of the century or whatever, and so there had to be different technologies, like sort of corpusing. When you get to the top of one, another technology comes in, and these are paradigm shifts, right? So what is the next paradigm? If the last paradigm shift, I guess, was integrated circuits, right?
I mean, Moore's law only deals with integrated circuits. I mean, this, if we go back to the original chart, this started with relays, went to vacuum tubes, went to discrete transistors, then to integrated circuits, then to integrated circuits that are devoted to AI, which is a little bit different. And when it changed from one technology to another, you don't see it. It's just basically a straight line, which is exponential growth. And people don't think in terms of exponential growth. I mean, you talk to people all the time, and they say, well, that took 10 years in the past, so now something similar is going to take 10 years in the future, and they don't think exponentially.
What effect do you think quantum computing is going to have on the growth of computing technology?
I'm not a big fan of quantum computing.
You're not a big fan. Okay, why?
I mean, this is all conventional computing, but it's very fast. I mean, it's doing trillions of calculations per second, where it started with, 0.0007 calculations per second. The idea of quantum computing is each bit is a qubit and can consider both positive and negative. And it can, if you put together 50 qubits, it can consider every combination of those 50 qubits. So therefore, you could break encryption codes. Because encryption codes, you have to be able to factor large numbers. So you could give it a very large number, and it can actually come up with the factors of that immediately. Conventional computing has to try every possibility, and it would take a very long time. And basically, it can't be done. They tell you that they've made a lot of progress in quantum computing, but they can't actually solve this equation. They can't actually take a bit. The most they've actually done is like 7 bits. And it's not even clear that they can do that. And 7 bits, of course, you can do with conventional computing. And unless it gets to about 50 bits, it's not.
So if integrated circuits, and this whole thing from the 30s on, was the last major paradigm shift, right? What is the next paradigm shift that takes us to the singularity?
Well, there'll probably be a few before this, but when we get to using nanotechnology, Rob Frieders, for example, has analyzed the ultimate nanotechnology-based computer, and basically a 1-liter size computer could do 10 to the 25th calculations per second, which is about equal to all unenhanced humans on the planet. That's way beyond where we are today, but that's maybe the ultimate of what you can achieve.
So when the Singularity Is Nearer came out in '05, which is now 20 years ago, it projected these things that back then seemed totally crazy to people.
Well, we projected that AGI would happen by 2029, which people who are knowledgeable about this thought, well, they didn't agree with the 30 years. And Stanford actually held a conference, and several hundred people came to examine my prediction. And they all agreed that, yes, it would happen, but not within 30 years. The 80% there thought it would happen. 20% thought it would never happen. But the 80% thought that it would happen within 100 years, not 30 years.
And you were projecting it would happen within 30 years.
Right.
So now,
now
last year, you came out with a new book, The Singularity Is Nearer. And having had 30 years of projections saying it's going to happen by 2029, where did you end up in the new book?
The same thing.
The same thing. So 30 years, you basically said, I was right the first time, and everything I predicted has happened.
Now it's conservative. I mean, most people, New York Times ran an article, I think you're familiar with, where they're saying 2027 we'll have AGI. 2029 now is considered conservative.
So effectively, now what you wrote originally in 1999, when you were saying it'll happen in 30 years, people thought that was science fiction and was nuts. When you came out with The Singularity Is Near, people thought it was sort of nuts, but really scary and maybe. And now it's really, this is accepted knowledge, right? Most people accept the fact.
And I based it on this graph. I mean, I had about half the graph and projected that it would continue, which it has. People just basically just said, well, it'll be 100 years, because it's a nice run.
And so so your whole book originally proving it, and now looking back, 20 years later, you said, I said this and it happened, I said that and it happened, and the fundamental underlying thesis was this exponential growth, which has happened, and so therefore that takes you to 2045 and the singularity. So what is the difference between artificial general intelligence in 2029 or sooner, which is where you have a computer that can think better than anybody on the planet, and an unlimited number of them, and between that and 2045, which is the singularity? So first of all, let's back up. What is the singularity?
All right, well, there's two things. First, we get to AGI, which means a computer can do anything that a person can do, and it does it much faster. Now, my original projection was rejected initially. They felt it would happen, but it would take 100 years. And I was saying 30. Now people have accepted that, but I'm saying it's actually going to be good for humanity. Whereas people, I'd say the majority of people who are engaged in this field are somewhat negative about it. Either somewhat negative or very negative, it's going to wipe out humanity. So that's become the controversial aspect.
Well, the interesting thing is, if you posit that by 2029 we will have an equal number of non-people who are smarter than all the people out there, and may know what's better for the planet, right? So how do we maintain the alignment? How do we ensure that this AGI, this new intelligence, is working for us or with us?
Well, I have a somewhat different opinion than most people. People think we have AI, and then there's AI, artificial intelligence, it's over here. It's us versus the artificial intelligence, as if this came from nowhere. I mean, AI came from Mars, and it's nothing to do with us. It's created by someone else. Not only have we created it, but it's actually going to enhance us. Now, it enhances us somewhat. We can use our computer, but it's just somewhat different. I mean, I'll bet everybody here has their cell phone. I mean, the number of people who did not bring their cell phone to this meeting is probably very limited. That wasn't true 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. People had cell phones, but they didn't always bring it. Now this is actually enhancing ourselves. But ultimately, we're not going to be able to tell. You can tell when something comes from AI versus something comes from your own mind, because you can tell the difference. It's going to actually go inside us. You're not going to be able to tell the difference if you just think of something or it's produced by the AI. We're going to become a lot smarter. I mean, suppose you could do what AI does today. And I'd say, write something funny in the style of I
Okay, so AI is going to be a tool that we use, and increasingly it reacts with us. And what's the difference between AGI in 2029 and the singularity? How does that merging happen?
Well, the full merger is going to take through the 2030s. Because right now, we can tell if something comes from your phone or it comes from some kind of electronics or it comes from your own mind. By the early 2030s, say 2033, you won't be able to tell if it's coming from AI or it's coming from...
So effectively, that's known as the Turing
And
test,
we're
right?
going to make ourselves enormously more smart. And by 2045, we'll make ourselves 1 million times smarter than we are today. And that's such a hard to understand what that will mean that we borrow this metaphor from physics and call it something that we can't really fully absorb.
So that's the singularity.
Yeah.
So effectively what you're saying is when humans become 1 million times smarter than humans are, it's not just the AI has become smarter, it's you're saying we are going to somehow integrate with
creating AI that's making us smarter, which we already are. I mean, we're already a great deal smarter than we were 100 years ago when we didn't even have computers. But this will make, it's an exponential. I mean, we can actually measure the amount that's going by. When we get to 2045, the paradigm shift is going to be so rapid that we're not going to be able to tell.
So essentially, to simplify this down, what you're saying is that AI will continue to develop at this incredible, insane exponential rate, that instead of being something separate, well, I'll go to my computer and type it in and have it write an E. E. Cummings poem for me, it will be increasingly closer. And well, let's talk there for a minute. How will this happen? How are we going to physically integrate, with whether it's virtual reality or neuro or brain-computer interfaces? What's going to happen?
Well, the next thing is virtual reality, which is already there. It's not quite good enough, but it will. So rather than looking at our phone and having to type things in, it'll be listening. You get stuck. You can't really think of the name of that actress. It's following you. It'll pop up. You won't have to ask it the question. You're trying to think of something. It will be thinking with you.
And how will we connect? Will it be a goggle or a headset or a brain-computer interface? Or
eventually, it'll be inside our minds.
So it'll be inside our body. I mean, there are people now currently, right?
Yes, but it requires surgery. This will be done without surgery. It'll be quite simple.
Okay. So effectively, we will, instead of having a device or a computer or even a headset, it'll be and not requiring invasive surgery, we will be able to take our brains and plug them into the thing.
Exactly right, yeah.
You know, and that will have 1 million times more power than we do.
Well, by 2045.
By 2045, okay. So that's the singularity. So by 2045, we will affect, which is only 20 years from now, people. I mean, it's not a long time out there, right? So by 2045, when everybody hopefully in this room is still around, we are going to have 1 million times greater, brain power. We will be able to have effectively merged, right, with technology.
Right. That's the idea of the singularity. One other thing we should mention is longevity escape velocity.
So what is that? So longevity escape velocity, what does that mean?
So right now, you go through a year and you use up a year of your longevity. However, we also have scientific research that's creating new cures, new ways of treating disease. So you actually get back, if you're diligent and keep track of progress, you get back today about 4 months. So you're actually only...
4 months a year?
Yeah.
Wow.
So you're only right now aging 8 months out of for 12 that go by. but you are getting older by 8 months.
Okay.
However, the scientific research is on an exponential curve. One thing that we're just beginning to do, I mentioned earlier, computers can take every different possibility of a cure and actually simulate them and do that very, very quickly. I mentioned.
So does this end up with people living forever?
Not exactly. But according to my estimates, about 2032, we'll get back a year from the advance of scientific
2032,
progress.
okay.
So you age a year, but you get back a year, so you actually don't age at all. So you won't die of aging. Now, you could be a 20-year-old, you could be perfectly healthy, and you could die tomorrow.
So effectively, you're saying that within 8 years from now, 7 or 8 years from now, not a very long time, we will have effectively stopped aging forward. And wherever we are at that
provided you're somewhat diligent.
Okay. So does that mean that it's only accidents kill you, or?
We're also making progress on accidents. I mean, Waymo, well, if you drive in a Waymo car, I mean, nobody has died from them, and there's quite a few, and they are much more careful than people driving cars.
So what happens with population growth?
Well, that's where these other charts come in. I've got about 50 graphs in here that show you how we're.
These, right? Let's see. Nope, that's it. We
Well,
don't,
there's one
we don't
more.
have population. Okay. We just.
No, you got another graph there.
No, I think we have. We got
There it
electricity.
is.
Oh, this one. Yep.
We're making exponential progress on solar energy, for example, and we're actually, it's like 99.7% less expensive than it was when we began.
So do we get to effectively unlimited energy?
So in about 10 years, we'll be able to actually generate enough solar energy to create all the energy we need. Now, the industry won't immediately go that way, but it will be cheap enough to do that. Ultimately, we'll be able to get our energy from non-renewable resources. So I've got 50 different graphs that show exponential growth. People say, well, but land, I mean, we need a certain amount of land to create a house. But if you take a train anywhere, you'll see that most of the land's not used. I mean, if you live in New York City, it looks very crowded. But if you live somewhere else.
So do you think population increases or you get to zero population growth? What do you think?
Well, right now, population's actually going down in the countries that are more affluent. I think it'll go up somewhat, but it won't be significant. We'll be able to deal with the.
Okay. So to sum up what we've just heard here, within, pick your number, of 5, 7, 8 years, we will be living forever. We will not have a population explosion to kill the whole world. We will have unlimited energy to support the operation of an unlimited number of AIs who are smarter than all the people in the world, and we will have effectively integrated all of this AI with our own bodies and our own selves. So, and that's where we get to the singularity in 2045, right?
And that's a little bit different than what most people think. I mean, most people think that AI is different from us, and it's us versus AI.
But it'll be internalized.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. We're going to have a lot of questions here from the audience. We're trying to get through them as many as we can.
Are we at that point already?
But so just a couple of things before I get to the audience questions, which is, so the reason the term the singularity was coined by Werner Wing, right? Who used the term the singularity first?
Well, Newman actually used it first, but he just used it as basically one comment. He made the technology is moving at an exponential rate, and it will be a singularity. But that's all he said. Vinge actually discussed it in his.
And so, as you used it in the book, both books, the Near and Nearer, If it's as you described, at that point we have millions of times more power. It's integrated with us.
Which we've already done a lot.
So the reason it's called the singularity is because we don't know, we can't see back in time before the original singularity, and we really can't see past this. So if there's anybody in the planet who could imagine what it might be like in 20 years to live past that, it would be you. So what do you see happening here?
To do that. So,
I mean, do you have any clue as to what this world looks like in 2045?
well, we can overcome a lot of the problems we have, like dying before our times.
So that'll be us, people sitting here, or maybe we'll have non-corporeal entities that will somehow,
Yeah, people look pretty young, but even if you're not that young, but I actually had a conversation this guy was 90, it's won the Nobel Prize in economics. He was actually in very good health. I would meet him on a regular basis, talking about the economic implications of my theory. And we got into a real debate. His name was Kahneman. And I was saying that we're making rapid progress in coming up with cures for diseases. And he would, even though he was familiar with my ideas, he would not accept that. What I didn't realize, he had actually planned to kill himself. And I was completely unaware of that. He was not sick. He did not have any disease. But he had heard that as you go through your 90s, you lose control of your capabilities, and it's kind of miserable, and he wanted to avoid that. And so he ended up killing himself to avoid that. And he actually had a plan to do that within a few months of when I was talking to him. And I didn't realize that.
So several of the questions that we've gotten from the audience are, they're questions about what are you scared of, right? I mean, if some people, there is a hypothesis called the San Francisco consensus, or the AI 2027 consensus, which says that AGI is already here or pretty close to it, and the computers are this other thing, this AI, and they are doing their stuff, and they're going to talk to each other, and we're going to be almost an ancillary thing over here, and they're going to run the world. And the question is, how do we make sure they don't kill us, right? That's a sort of scary approach. You are taking the integrated approach, which is that the technology is us, and it takes on our values. But how do we...
Well, they came to two different conclusions. One was positive, one was negative. But as I say, a lot of people who examine this are negative, and that's really the controversy.
So what makes you positive? Why are you... How can we reassure everybody that there's a good outcome here?
I mean, I do worry about things. I mean, we look at human history. We had about 100 million people die in Europe and Asia from World War II. Today we have wars, I'd say maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people die. That's terrible, but it's better than it was 80 years ago when we had World War II. So we've made some progress there, but that still upsets me. So the things that upset me, and being able to get the alignment correctly on
Well,
AI
but what scares you? If you think about this immense, insane technology growth we're talking about, right? And hopefully what I hear you saying is that we integrate it with us, we as people who are generally good, because
I think that's likely to happen, but it's not certain to happen.
It's likely to happen.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that concerns me.
And so the question then is, what can we do if other people are concerned as well? Or what can we as people do?
Well, I mean, we're analyzing this and trying to avoid problems, but it does concern me, and it could go awry. So I'm not unconcerned about that.
So in the fictional world of the future, Isaac Asimov wrote I, Robot, and in his whole robot sequence, he had the concept of the three laws of robotics, where every robot was definitionally from initial construction programmed that its first thing is it can do no harm to a person, and then it went on from there. Is that possible with AI?
Well, I don't think his thing would work because robots can pretend to be people, and so you really can't tell who they are. And they will be part of us. So you get talking to a normal human being, most of their actions will be created by the AI that's within them. So you're not going to be able to separate them.
So
I'm optimistic, but I'm not oblivious to the possible danger.
Okay, so one of the questions here is, what is it, of all the projections you've made, going back now, 30, 40 years, what's the one in which you were most wrong?
Well, I didn't take into consideration the amount of additional positivity that would be required to accept them. Take automatic driving, for example. It has to be a lot better than human beings. If it's really just equal, maybe a little bit better, we're not going to accept it. The first Waymo accident that causes a death has not happened, but when it happens, there'll be all kinds of attention given to it. The fact that somebody is killed by a human driver, that happens like every several minutes, and we don't pay any attention to it. So there's an additional, one of the predictions I made in 1999, about 2009, is we'd have self-driving cars. We had cars that were experimental, but we still don't have self-driving cars that everybody uses because we're actually demanding a much higher
So that's
value.
really interesting on a number of counts. So you originally predicted that we'd have self-driving cars by now, and back then, as I recall, the engineers who were working on self-driving cars said, "Oh, Ray's crazy. We're not anywhere near that. I'm dividing this stuff, and I can't do it." And your point was, okay, I'm not a car engineer, but I'm looking at this extraordinary exponential curve, and somehow, some way, you're going to do it. And so you were right. We have the effect of self-driving cars, and the cars that exist today that are self-driving are demonstrably, provably, statistically better in almost every way than a person, and they are safer, and yet our society is not adopting it.
Yeah.
Do you think that's going to play out in other areas as well, including the use of AI as tools for education? Or
Well, in medicine also, we're very careful not to make mistakes. We could actually do things that would have some mistakes, but it would actually save people, and that's not good enough. It has to be up to a very high standard.
So two areas as we move forward toward the singularity. One is education, and the other is medicine, right? In terms of how do you see in this transition?
Medicine's very important. I mean, everyone's going to benefit from that.
So it's often difficult for us to realize how far and
I was
how
trying
fast
to tell Kahneman this.
medicine has come.
And even though he's 90 and has actually nothing wrong with him, things that might happen, we're going to come up with cures very quickly. He couldn't accept that.
But what's interesting is, the idea of hip of transplants, transplants of hearts, the artificial heart, kidneys.
Well, I'm on the board of United Therapeutics. We're actually creating kidneys. Right now, if you get on this list, there's 100,000 people who need a kidney. Only 5,000 do we generate from humans. If you could actually create a kidney, we'd have an unlimited number, and that's what we're trying to do. And this is a person actually living now who's got an artificial kidney. That's perfectly fine. So.
I mean, I had my hip replaced last June, and it was done by a robot. Literally, a robot came in and in 60 minutes replaced a hip, and I walked out of the hospital. I mean, that kind of, even thinking about that would have been inconceivable 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Do you think we get to literally robotic doctors? And
Well, we're getting most people do get a lot of information from computers already, and that's happening very quickly.
One of the most interesting areas in terms of the explosion of knowledge, one of the reasons that software has grown exponentially is because it grows on itself, and everything you do, it feeds in, and it's a positive feedback loop.
We should get some more of the questions.
Okay, so I'm paraphrasing here as we're going through, and so one of those has to do with education, right? Which is, how do you see AI affecting education? In theory today, ChatGPT, or Gemini can teach you anything, right? And so if you now have education available to everybody, what's going to happen?
I mean, I was on the MIT board. I just gave a talk to the board about this. Educational institutions, from preschool education up through postgraduate education, all of its basically attitude towards AI is don't use it.
Still.
The kids know how to use it, and they're actually benefiting from it. It reminds me of the the issue we had when I went to college of using calculators. If we allow people to use calculators, they won't learn how to use long division anymore. And indeed, people's long division skills have suffered, but the calculators haven't gone away, and we understand what division means. So, and the world is rapidly going towards AI. I mean, just the hardware and software gains are going to be tenfold over the next 1 year. Compare AI today to AI 1 year ago. It couldn't have created this joke, for example. It actually understands humor in a pretty subtle way, which it didn't understand like 1 year ago. So the world is going to be even more immersed with AI than it is today. So to not teach this in college is preparing people for a world that doesn't exist.
Well, thinking not about teaching AI per se, making people AI experts, but using AI to teach liberal arts, to teach everything else we know. During the demo of GPT-4o, they had their launch demo, they had Sal Khan of Khan Academy with his son working with the AI as a teacher. And what you saw in the demo was this endlessly patient, customized teacher responding and talking to a kid.
Which we can do already, and it's going to become even more so. So the whole idea of AI is going to...
But what that means in theory, since this stuff is effectively free, is that 8 billion people in the world, everybody now has the ultimate, perfect, ideal teacher on any particular subject.
And they're going to merge with AI. They're going to become capable of knowing that much more knowledge.
So that then brings us to one of the questions. There have been several questions that have asked the same thing, which is, okay, if all this stuff is happening and the world's going to completely change, we can't figure it out, what would you recommend or suggest to people? What can we do now to begin to prepare for the singularity? What advice would you give everybody in this audience?
I mean, follow the same advice that I'd give like 40 years ago, which is follow your passion and do things that are meaningful to you. My 10-year-old grandson creates movies using AI. And he does this outside of school because they really don't want him to use AI in school.
But putting aside for the minute the fact that some schools don't want to teach AI and there are hallucinations and there are problems, and looking forward to this transitional period, one of the questions that many people have asked is what happens to work as AI replaces people? And my personal take on this as the founding track chair of economics for Singularity University is that we're going to have very rapidly a situation where most people are economically unemployable, which means that they cannot create value in our current society in any better, faster, or cheaper than AI.
Without becoming part of
unless they're part of AI, but that's not there yet. And so therefore, since you're not going to have to starve.
We use our cell phones, and So we can tell where ideas are coming from. We're only a few years away from not being able to tell whether an idea is coming from the AI that's part of us or our own.
But ultimately, an
biological
individual
intelligence.
person's work, right, is going to be challenging to economically, capitalize on.
But not if you have AI as part of you. You'll be able to compete.
Everybody in the same way? Or so is what you're saying that the human differences will effectively become a minor part?
No, I think there'll be more differences than there are today. I mean, AI will expand us and will therefore have more differences, but we'll be able to compete.
Okay, so then positively thinking, optimistically thinking, if we'll be more different, is every biological human person different in some way that when amplified by AI will enable value creation?
Yes, I mean, if you look at the financial graphs that I've provided, we've actually done extremely well, and we're going to continue to do well, and we're going to amplify what we can do. We've already done that.
So now you've been a supporter of UBI, Universal Basic Income, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, so universal basic income says that, if society is continuing to create value from technology or anything else, and ultimately society takes that value through taxation in some way and redistributes it as a standard, effectively as of right, to everybody, which allows them to effectively self-actualize or do whatever they are going to do without regard to being necessarily economically having to generate value. So another question that several people have asked is, what kind of culture do you see this integration of technology into people changing the fundamental culture of humanity?
It's become much broader. I mean, right now, we have a situation where a significant portion of the population, it used to be like 90%. Now it's maybe a quarter to a third of the population can't contribute at all, and they barely have a place to live. That's changing already.
What is changing? The fact that they will have a place to live, or the fact that they can contribute to society?
All of it.
Okay.
And more and more people have access to the internet and will have access to AI, and that'll be part of our intelligence, and we'll be able to contribute. That's why educational institutions should use AI, because that's the world we're going to live in.
So one of the questions has to do with regulation of AI. Right now, other than blocking the export of chips to China and other places, there is little to no regulation of large language models in the US now.
Well, it's not really true. I mean, large companies, if they put forth a product and people use it and cause great havoc, they'll be out of business. I mean, they're very, very careful, despite what you might think.
Right, okay, but that's self-regulation, that's not governmental regulation, right?
Well, but they create enormous liability if they avoid that.
Okay, but so one of the questions, this AI 2027 San Francisco consensus about AI's taking over the world strongly suggests that we need immediate regulation of these large language models themselves. Do you believe in that or not?
I think we should talk about it. There's a lot more regulation than we realize. I mean, we have a lot of regulation on everything we do. And for example, you want to get involved with putting out new health regulations. It's a tremendous amount of regulation in that. And if you do the wrong thing and people die from it, you'll have a tremendous amount of liability. The liability is already there. This causes an enormous amount self-regulation.
Well, so there are some questions about LLMs, the large language models that underlie this transformative AI. In the AI 2027 report, their position is that once a model is ahead of other models, all things being equal, it will likely remain through multiple iterations always ahead of the next one. Today, we now have...
Is that really true? I mean, we had, like 3 years ago, we had like 1 or 2.
Okay, but that's the question.
Now we have like 10 or 12
today there are a dozen
major
models.
things, and plus minor models. I mean, it's
So what do you think happens there? Do you think we end up having a dozen models, 10 years from now, or is there one model?
I think there'll be even more choice than there is today.
More choices of models. So that would seem to be a good thing, right? And you don't have one monolithic model taking over humanity, but...
Maybe. You could worry about the models that aren't...
So one question is, do we need specific foundation models for critical sectors like aviation, for example? If you have, ChatGPT managing your air traffic control, is that going to work, or do you need...
No, but we already have regulations in aviation and lots of other things which are not going away. And if you put something out and it breaks all the aviation rules and people die, you'll be out of business because of the liability you're creating.
Okay. What do you think of blockchain technology?
I'm a little more enthusiastic than I am than quantum computing, but I don't think we've actually solved that problem. And the values go up and down in a way that's not really conducive.
So just to level set, blockchain technology is the idea that you don't have to have a person or a government in control of something, that there can be effectively by consensus a standard database or items that exist universally that can be used to interchange or other kinds of things.
Yeah, that's a good goal, but we haven't really achieved that yet.
Okay. So here's one that says, despite dramatic improvement in computation and capabilities, humans have struggled to translate that into actual productivity enhancements. So how do you see this actual...
That's absurd.
There you have the answer. Okay.
I mean, just look at this graph that's up there now. I mean, this is the amount of value that each person has in constant dollars, $2,023. Over time, it's about tenfold what it was compared to 100 years ago.
And you see that exponential curve continuing?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's a question about brain-computer interfaces, BCI, right? Which is right now it's invasive, but eventually it'll be non-invasive and ultimately wireless and ambient or whatever it is. Do you see that as a key piece toward the singularity? So will everybody ultimately be interfacing with their brains?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have virtual reality before that. And we see some attempts to create virtual reality today. They're not really there yet, but I think we'll be there by the early 2030s. And by the late 2030s, we'll be able to go inside our brains and be able to see what's going on.
So the first step is external VR and then internalized kinds of things.
Yeah.
And do you see the nanotechnological developments with, for example, cancer-fighting mini robots in your bloodstream and things like that as separate from the BCI?
Well, I've been saying for a while we're going to simulate biology inside the computer. Just recently, over the last year, I'm talking to people that are doing this, that actually create these tests for pharmaceutical companies. They're all doing simulated biology. And so I'm asking them, okay, well, when do you think we're going to be able to replace human testing with simulated testing? Because simulated testing can take a matter of days or weeks, and actually testing on humans can take years. The first part of it is actually figuring out what we're going to test. That's already been done with simulated biology. They wouldn't have to worry about it because we're not putting it out for people to use, we're just putting it out for people to test. And that's already happened. So that used to take years, now it takes days. But the next thing is, when can we actually simulate, replace testing in humans with testing on a computer? And they're saying 5 years. So in 5 years, we'll be able, so it's already examining, the FDA is actually accepting computer testing, but not to replace human testing yet. But they're very much in favor of this, and their estimate is around 5 years.
Okay, when we effectively get there, say in 5 years, does that effectively solve all our health problems? I mean, if we can now instantly create any medication, any intervention for anything?
Probably take a few years to get there.
But that's what helps us get to longevity escape.
Right, I'm saying by 2032, a year will go by, you'll get back a year from medical progress.
Okay, so one thing, I'm going to combine a couple of questions
And
here.
when you go past that point, you'll actually get back more than a year.
And so we go back in time, or we just live longer, but okay, I got that. So here, a couple of questions have to do with this concept of alignment. And alignment in AI terms means that if the computer says something or thinks something or does something, is it aligned with human values, right? And so one question here has to do with, if right now all of these large language models are trained on the corpus of humanity, and the corpus of humanity, everything written and everything that we do, is imperfect because we are humans, and it is, whether it is non-equal, whether it preferences whatever group, is that built in now to AI? And the second question, I'll put it together.
Just to answer that.
Okay, go ahead.
I mean, right now, the lack of validity of online information really comes from social networks. Really, people that put things down, there's really no AI involved. And people are not the most reliable sources of information. Actually, the extent to which people use AI, like large language models, is actually improving the reliability of online information versus social networks, which nobody is really...
Well, but the question here is more along the lines of sort of built-in bias and alignment. So for example, 2 years ago, if you would ask ChatGPT to draw you a superhero, right? It sucked in everything that we've ever had in cartoons and movies about superheroes, and it would have drawn you, most likely, a white male, because Batman, Superman, The Flash, and everything all happen to be white males. So given that, and given that that was what was coming out of the large language models, with a idealistic approach, some of the models were proactively trying to overcome that. And so then people noticed that you said, okay, draw me the founding fathers of our country, and you would end up with a black George Washington, which was problematic, right? So the
Well,
question...
it goes back and forth, but we get to the right answer eventually.
Well, it's back and forth, but it's back and forth because of human intervention, deliberate intervention, because the basis, the corpus on which the LLMs were trained is the existing corpus of a society which has not been historically, equal.
Right, but if you look at what large language models do today, they're much more accurate than unregulated social networks.
So which leads us to a question about, given the political universe we're in right now, where unprecedented things are happening in Washington, where there has been a sea change in the way our government works with people and educational institutions and so on. Do you think that big tech is starting to realign LLMs with conservative values?
I mean, I do a lot of experimentation on all social networks to keep track of them. And they tend to avoid those issues. It doesn't give you, if you ask it a kind of blatantly legal or political issue, it won't really answer it.
Here's a question specifically about nanorobots, nanotechnology. So there's there's using it to analyze medicines and stuff, but the idea of shrinking machines down, the kind of stuff that Rob Freitas is doing and so on, to very small things that could be in your bloodstream, that could be targeted to cure a cancer or fix a valve or whatever. What kind of nanorobots do you find the most promising in the near-term future?
Well, dealing with the nanotechnology that biology came up with, DNA, I mean, we just cured a person very quickly with affecting their DNA. So actually manipulating DNA using the kinds of capabilities that biology came up with, but directing it towards desired outcomes is very promising and is working. It's beginning to work.
One of the areas in which you and I have had a slight difference of opinion is the question of employment and jobs relative to AI. And you've maintained correctly that history has shown that whenever new technologies have come into play, they have maybe killed an older job, but they have created new jobs because of that technology. And my thought is that we are now in a different type of thing where the jobs that are being taken out are ones that people will never be able to do better. What kind of jobs going down your path do you see AI enabling that don't necessarily exist today?
Well, you're saying we won't be able to do it. That's assuming that we're not enhanced by AI, which we are going to be. We are already, and we're going to be even more so.
So do you see any new types of jobs coming into play, or do you just see the existing jobs now being done by a wider variety of people?
Well, jobs is really not the concern. I mean, people take jobs because they need to earn a living and so on. What we really want to be able to do is be able to create knowledge that really turns us on. The kind of activity that somebody has who makes money and does something that they really love is what we're really seeking. And I think increasing our intelligence, I mean, it's going to vastly increase the intelligence of a person. That can't be bad if you're...
Oh, I agree. I certainly don't think it's bad. But that then, we're about out of time. So that brings us to my last question that I'm going to leave you with. And that is, in Ray Kurzweil's idealized future, right? The bad things don't happen. The AI 2027 stuff doesn't happen. Everything plays out exactly as you've imagined, where we literally integrate with AI. So it's not a tool, it is us. It takes on human values. Everybody can do everything there. We have unlimited energy, unlimited lifespans, right? What do you personally do with that unlimited lifespan, unlimited power, and unlimited value creation?
I'll be funnier, sexier, more able to express love to the people I care about. So.
And on that note, thank you all very much.